As you think about the terribly complicated and colossal problems of this new world situation economically, what do you think Christians might begin to think about it? What kind of wisdom, if any, can we bring that situation?
Well, that reminds me of an article that Harvey Cox, a Harvard Divinity School theologian, who was actually one of my earliest students, wrote a few years ago about the religion of mammon. You remember in the New Testament, Jesus says you cannot worship God and mammon. They're antithetical. Mammon, of course, can be translated as wealth or simply money. And what Harvey's point is that we have turned money into a kind of omnipotent, omniscient being that is supposed to control everything. The whole global economy is the worship of mammon. And we have seen what happens when you systematically reduce all structures of control, regulation, get rid of government, and let the market have its way, which is, in one sense, the cause of where we are today.
Some even talk about the magic of the marketplace.
Yes,
that's
right,
a religious
right,
term.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think George Soros, himself a very wealthy and successful manipulator of, let us say, the money market, George Soros says we're the victim of market fundamentalism.
Yeah.
What do you think he means by
well,
that?
Well, I think that's another side of this mammon worship, that it has a fundamentalist side. And the so-called neoliberal economics, which is a strange use of liberal in terms of our American usage, because we usually think that market people are conservatives, but they are classically liberals, turns the market into an autonomous agency that should be in control, and that if the more you leave it alone in terms of any kind of external restraints, the better it will be. And in the teeth of all counter evidence, including the current collapse, there are still people today who will argue that the unregulated market is the answer even to this situation. That's fundamentalism.
Flies in the face of facts.
Fundamentalism religiously means a kind of faith that's impregnable to any counter evidence, that will not deal with anything except what is already presumed as absolutely true without question. And I know you and I have both had the experience of Paul Tillich, who said faith without doubt is not true faith.
Yeah.
The refusal to doubt something and go on the basis that it is absolutely true in the economy is catastrophic.
I think we've got people coming to church now who are very troubled about their future, and they're troubled together. And they've been raised in a system that says, look, if you work hard personally, you will get richer, you'll do well.
Yes.
And now we find out that what seems to be no responsibility of our own turns off into economic need deeply. Now, I guess my question is, how can Christians help each other deal with the suffering that is happening all over America with some members of our church? And my next question is going to be, what do we have to do and to think about the suffering of a lot of other people out in the world who are going to be suffering a lot more than we are right now by this so-called recession?
Yes. Well, of course, that's a very daunting question, because a congregation doesn't have the resources to make up for the economic suffering that its own members have. I think in specific situations we can help in a short-term way, and we should. But the larger question is that many of the structures that we took for granted, particularly the notion that if you work hard and play by the rules, as the saying goes, you're going to be rewarded, don't seem to be working the way they should. And here we need to think about the institutions in the whole society. And Christians have a certain standard for what institutions are like, and they should bring those standards into the public square and do what they can to see that these institutions behave the way they should. we're in a strange situation where we, for a long time, because of our radical individualism, we've considered institutions the enemy anyway, including government, when Ronald Reagan said the government is not the solution, it's the problem. So we undermined confidence in our institutions, even when our institutions were functioning fairly well. So now, when we are quite justly angry at them because they have screwed up, they have done things they shouldn't have done, and they have done things that have had terrible consequences, we certainly don't start from a basis that they will ever do it right. And yet, it's a complicated dialectic here. If we don't have any faith in institutions, and if our life depends on institutions, we're really in a downward spiral. We have to, again, and this includes the church, because the church is an institution, work to reform it where it's gone wrong, to correct the errors when the leadership has made errors, and every single institution has had leaders that have made terrible errors, but not lose faith in the institutions themselves, because that is really self-destructive.
Somewhere in your recent writings, you have quoted from someone else that our society needs to reduce the punishments of failure and the rewards of success.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
We've been in a situation where, for most of the last 30 years, except for some slight difference in the 90s, the rich have been getting richer and the poor have been getting poorer. And that is very unhealthy for our entire institutional situation.
In this society, we certainly have managed to reduce some of the punishments of failure. There is, after all, unemployment insurance.
Yes.
Very embarrassing for a lot of, say, business executives to lose their job, and suddenly they are part of this unemployment insurance.
Yes,
And one thing we need to say is it's a good thing because it keeps a bit of a floor under failure. In this society, maybe we have a harder time believing we should reduce the rewards of success. We don't do very well at saying that people should not make more than $500,000 a year, do we? I mean, that's sort of thought to be somehow a violation of liberty and deserving.
Yes. And apparently 75% of Americans have bought this notion that the inheritance tax is the so-called death tax.
Yeah.
And at the moment, a couple can leave $7 million to their heirs without paying any tax at all.
Yeah.
And to abolish the inheritance tax for multimillionaires and billionaires would cost the American Treasury $1 trillion in the next 10 years. It would be catastrophic for our economy. Now, why is this? You know, there's a wonderful optimism in spite of all our problems. Americans think, well, maybe I will be making more than $500,000. I don't want to have it capped at that. But, and you know, another interesting poll finding is that they asked people, are you in the top 1% of income? 19% of Americans said they were in the top 1%, and 25% said they expected to be in the top 1% during their lifetime.
Yeah.
So you've got nearly 50% of Americans imagining that either now or not too distant from now, they'll be in the top 1%. Hello. I mean, this is mathematically impossible, to put it mildly.
Often in America, our biggest dialogue either is or ought to be between liberty and justice. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that the resentment about some of these mega bonuses comes out of a sense of injustice.
Yes.
Now, liberty is our big word in our social ideology.
Yes.
But occasionally justice peeps in and even breaks in.
Yes.
And I'd like to know what you think about that as a Christian. I mean, I'm thinking particularly about those prophets that you referred to, and the whole idea of justice as a social matter as to who gets what and how much.
Yes, so the biblical tradition, both the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament, are eloquent on the sufferings of the poor, the injustice that arises when those who are well off and those who are powerful oppress the poor, grind their heads into the dust, as the prophets put it, profit out of the misery of others. I mean, this is a central theme of biblical religion. I mean, compared to this discussion of homosexuality, which is not totally absent, but surely very slight. The concern with poverty and the suffering and injustice that goes with poverty is absolutely central in very many parts of the
And the
Bible.
same in teachings of Jesus.
And certainly in the teachings of Jesus, is always reminding us of the poor.
What would you like to say to a person like the one that Robert Withnell found, who said, he was talking about his possessions. What I have is mine, and it's mine because I deserve it, and I have a right to it.
Yes.
Say the $7 million that I've made, which I have a right to hand on to my children.
Yes, yes. Well, this is the ideology of Ayn Rand and the whole extreme market notion that individuals should maximize their own good, and somehow that will work out to the best for everyone. I think the right way to approach the young man who said that is trying to get him to understand that although what he has is his own, he never would have had what he has without the help of not only his family and his people that he works with, but with millions of other people that have contributed to his good, and that he isn't all alone in the world, that he does depend on others, that we are members of one another, and that way of putting it that he has is simply untrue. It's not part of the real world.